It's Friday, the 28th of April, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Podnews, back home in Brisbane.
And I'm Sam Sethi, CEO of Podland, still stuck just outside of London and desperate for a trip.
In the chapters today, if the chapters work, which they may not, YouTube Music now has podcasts, and podcasts in the app are presumably coming very soon. We'll explain what we mean by all of that. Spotify's financial results as well, and the Podcast Survey 2023 released by Ofcom. And also...
My name is Staffan Rosell, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Podex, and I'll be on later to talk about the future plans of Podex Group.
I'm Ami Tucker. I am so excited to talk about my podcast, Tuckered Out with Ami Tucker, and the Podcast Academy.
They will. This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 4,140 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support. And now you can turn your listeners into supporters with Buzzsprout subscriptions. Go on, give it a whirl with us at weekly.podnews.net.
From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
So, James, let's kick this off. I don't know if it's an ongoing saga or it's just actually, something useful, but YouTube claim now that they have finally got podcasts into the YouTube Music app. I'm getting bored of this, so tell me more.
Yes, and in fact, it's not YouTube claiming. YouTube have, in their inimitable style, not said anything about this. But if you are in the US or you use a US VPN, which is kind of handy, visit music.youtube.com and you can see podcasts appear in there. You can search for podcasts. You can see recommended episodes. You can add podcasts to your library, all of that kind of stuff. And one of the interesting things is that the player changes if you're listening to a podcast. So it's got a skip forward 30 seconds, skip back 10 seconds control, which doesn't happen with music for obvious reasons. So, yeah, it's really interesting seeing it just popping up in the web version. And what tends to happen, because I'm a YouTube Music user, what tends to happen is that YouTube Music on the website seems to follow or seems to be very close to the YouTube Music app. So my guess is that we will see podcasts on the app very soon, but not quite yet. And this is James in the edit. And of course, within 12 hours of recording this show, YouTube ended up adding it to the YouTube Music app as well, which you'll see if you're in the US. So that's nice. Anyway, back to former me. But yes, if you want to see what podcasts look like on YouTube, you can now have a play, if you've got a US VPN, with YouTube Music.
I'm not sure I'll ever say listen to your podcast on YouTube, though. It's just the same as saying, look, you can't call English sparkling wine champagne because it's not grown in Champagne. I don't think you can call YouTube a podcast because it doesn't have RSS. Just my opinion. Yeah,
and I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, they are saying a chat that I had with somebody at YouTube/Google was basically saying if you are going to mention it, then talk about YouTube, not talking about YouTube Music, because YouTube works everywhere and podcasting YouTube Music is US only for some reason. Still don't really understand why, because it's a great experience, on the app. So I'm sure it'll be fine. But as you say, podcasts don't really have anything to do with RSS on YouTube. I wonder whether that's a dying conversation or whether the traditionalists among us are going to be, moaning and groaning for many years to come.
I suspect it's the latter. Now, the UK Managing Director of YouTube, Alison Lomax, is set to speak at the Podcast London show, so maybe we can ask her when we meet her. She's going to be talking on a panel with the guys from Listen, which is really exciting.
Yes, so that'll be really good. I think Listen are looking after one of the stages. They've got 10 stages. 350 speakers. And I notice going through the big list that I'm not there at all. So there's clearly been a missed email. But that's fine by me. I'm perfectly happy not to be speaking on a stage. But anyway, we'll find out what's going on there. But yes, looking forward to the podcast show in London in just a couple of weeks now, 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. Now, let's move on. Spotify announced their Q1 financials for 2023. But before we get into them, James, let's round up, because obviously you were time traveling around Berlin. What was your overall view of, the event over in Berlin then?
I have to say I was really impressed. So it was an event which clearly had a lot of money put behind it. There's clear benefits to Spotify running the All Ears conference one day and then the All Music Summit the next day in the same venue, because obviously you've got benefits there in terms of using those particular spaces. But it was a really positive experience. Lots of different people there. I think they had 5 different tracks that were going on. Lots of very excited people and very thrilled about podcasting, and lots of people that weren't Spotify as well. Which was good. So I was on stage. Javier Piñol, who is their global head of markets for talk content at Spotify, a man with a very fine beard, and also one of the nicest people ever in the world. He was super good, and we had a good chat about where the future of podcasting is. I think I may have typically made a name for myself by suggesting that Spotify shouldn't necessarily be aiming at being the only place to download podcasts, and instead be the best place to download podcasts. That got a round of applause from the audience. I'm not necessarily sure that it went down particularly well with the folk at Spotify, but it was a great event, and it was great to sit down and have chats with Javier as well. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, so Spotify believes that podcast advertising could be easier and more efficient as well. You did an interview, didn't you, with Nina Harvey?
Yes, I did. And she looks after the Spotify Audience Network and Megaphone for much of Europe. And she very much believes that scale is very important here in terms of podcasting. No one really is going to be trying to buy tons of different shows from tons of different places. So it's much easier just to buy audiences at scale through one particular buying point. And of course, the Spotify Audience Network would suggest it's them. I would imagine that Acast would suggest it's them too. So, there we are. But she was great to catch up with. And it was a good interview with her for the Podcast Business Journal last week. This week, Dan Granger is in the interviewee chair. And that's a good interview as well. And hopefully by this time tomorrow, you'll be able to read those interviews on the Podcast Business Journal website as well, podcastbusinessjournal.com. Hopefully, if I've done all of the tech stuff right.
Now, let's look at some of the financials then. So Spotify released their Q1 financial report. Podcast revenue grew by nearly 20%, which is pretty impressive. It was driven by original and exclusive podcasts where sold impressions grew strong double digits and CPMs increased in high single digits. Were you impressed by their Q1 results, James? I
mean, I was certainly impressed by the fact that their podcast revenue is growing quite nicely. It's not, overall, the company is still losing money and all of that. So, although the subscribers figure is up as well, but I think seeing podcast revenue growing by 20% is pretty good. Also interesting, the numbers that Spotify didn't release. They didn't release a total amount of podcasts. They didn't release a figure that they used to release, which was how many of their overall MAUs are listening to podcasts, which they've not now released for quite some time. So interesting, seeing that sort of side. But I think, overall, if you ignore the fact that they're still not making any money, I think overall they're doing pretty well.
Yeah, they made an operating loss of 156 million euros for the quarter, but they are still valued at $19 billion, and they surpassed their 500 million monthly active listeners, which I think is pretty impressive to hit a number. Putting that in perspective, of course, Facebook still has 2 billion monthly active users. And I'm surprised who they are, but they still do. So, if you want to sort of scale it or measure it against somebody, that's quite good. The company also made 3 billion in revenue in Q1. So again, that's 14% up year on year from last year. So again, I still think the numbers look like they're reducing the headcount, they're reducing the costs, they're trying to get to profitability, and seems to be going in the right direction, James.
Yes, I think so. And, I think it's all pretty good news in terms of, in terms of the Spotify numbers. The YouTube app, by the way, worldwide, if we're going to compare like with like, the YouTube app has around 880 million MAU. So interestingly close, I think, to where Spotify is at 515.
The other thing that was interesting was Daniel Ek's view. He said,
I think you're right in calling out the overpaying and overinvesting. And what I can start out by saying is we're not going to do that. We're going to be very diligent in how we invest in future content deals. And the ones that aren't performing, obviously, we won't renew. And the ones that are performing, we will obviously look at those on a case-by-case basis on the relative value.
Which I think is good. The big one for me, though, and I think you highlighted this in Podcast Daily, is Joe Rogan's show is up for renewal.
Because we're now the largest podcasting platform, that means we should be in a better position should we want to renew a deal.
Do you think he'll stay with Spotify?
Well, is the Joe Rogan show up for renewal? There's the interesting question. Now, if you read all of the information from, for example, the New York Times, then that quoted a 3.5-year deal, which started May 2020. Spotify contacted me and said, reaching out for a correction. Rogan's deal is not up in 6 months. So I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. So I said, when does it run out? Happy to run that detail. And the response that I've got, we've been correcting many folks. We won't be commenting on the terms right now, but definitely not ending this year. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Not ending this year. By the way, not ending this year is a much better quote than Rogan's deal is not up in 6 months. Because if Rogan's deal was not up in 6 months, it might be up in 3, it might be up in 7. But it turns out that no, it's not ending this year at all. But so who knows what is going on there? They're clearly playing secret squirrel. But, why not?
Yeah, well, I still stick with my prediction. I think Rogan won't get paid by Spotify and he'll return to YouTube. That is my prediction.
Yeah, it's not a bad prediction. And I think certainly reading between the lines, Daniel Ek was basically saying, look, we'll look very, very carefully about anything that we renew. And so, I think Joe Rogan may find it a little bit harder if, of course, his stuff is up for renewal. Now, they may have renewed it last year as part of the whole COVID stuff. Who knows? So, we'll at some point, presumably, they're going to say something about that.
Well, I think Joe Rogan might find he's got a big competitor coming to podcasting. Rumours are Tucker Carlson, who got fired by Fox News last week, is going to start a podcast.
Oh, great.
Look, not going to be on my roster of listening,
no.
But he brings a massive audience with him for wherever he goes. And I think, given he wants to lie and basically say whatever he likes without any rules, I think he'll get into podcasting very quickly with a big audience. I suspect he'll take a similar chunk of money to Rogan. Yeah,
well, it'll be interesting seeing that. Although, having said that, there have been quite a few ex-news people who have started podcasts, and most of those have sunk without trace. So, wait and see what Tucker Carlson ends up doing, although I doubt that I'll be one of the subscribers on that one. I can feel the emails of complaint coming in as we speak. If you're gonna email those complaints, then please tweet them and make sure that you include weekly.podnews.net in that tweet. That would be very kind of you. Thank you.
Good. Now, Ofcom, back here in the UK, released some podcast data, James. What have they said?
Yes, so they're the UK media regulator, and a few Americans have said, what's the UK media regulator doing getting interested in podcasts? They feel a bit suspicious, and I think it's absolutely fine. They're just keen to find out what's going on. Weirdly, though, our tax money, your tax money these days,
yes, James,
only goes to publishing the raw tables of data. So we actually had
we didn't have enough money.
Yeah, so we actually had to rely on somebody else to make some charts. And that somebody else was Adam Bowie, who is an excellent radio veteran, radio research veteran, as I believe we have to call him these days. Anyway, some really good figures. The headline figure is that the number of Brits listening to podcasts hasn't changed in the last 12 months, but it was relatively high anyway, so I'm not too concerned about that. The other thing, though, just to point out, is that Spotify is the most popular platform in the country, at least by reach, with BBC Sounds, then YouTube, then Apple Podcasts in the top platform. So Apple Podcasts number 4 in that list, which I found interesting. What's going on in the UK then? You can imagine BBC Sounds doing very well, but where would Apple Podcasts be if they had that Android app?
Nudge, hint, nudge.
Yeah, a little bit higher, one would have thought.
There you go. Wonder if they're listening. Now, moving on. Acast have released the weirdest survey. I don't get it, right? So I'm going to ask you. So they say listeners to radio shows on podcast platforms are older, less well-educated, and significantly more male than listeners to native podcasts made for the medium, right? This was research from Acast in France. James, I don't get that at all. So please unpack it.
I think really it's a content conversation that actually, if you're listening to reheated radio shows on a podcast, so, in much the same way as you can listen to any old BBC show or quite a few BBC shows that have been broadcast on the radio and then they're made available as a podcast. What Acast has found out is that the listeners to those shows are very much more old than the listeners to native podcasts, to podcasts made specifically for the medium. And I think that what all that's basically saying is that the content that the large radio broadcasters are making is more attractive to people who are, older than, in inverted commas, native podcasts that aren't getting made to be broadcast on the radio. I did think that, though, that was quite interesting information. That actually, overwhelmingly, that probably points to Radio France being for older folk, and that's probably fair. I think that's probably where that particular broadcaster's age range is.
Well, part of that report also, thankfully, Apple will be now happy again, is that the Apple Podcast is the number 1 app in France, with Spotify in second place and Deezer in third.
Yes, and not only that, but number 1 app to listen to podcasts, but also in terms of total downloads per person. Then once more, it actually shows that Spotify isn't doing very well in terms of total downloads. Apple Podcasts has 3 times the amount of downloads per person than Spotify. So, we've seen that data in the past. In the US from PodTrack, it's very, very similar. It does seem to show that people do use Spotify for podcasts, but they don't necessarily use Spotify much for podcasts. And so Spotify claiming that they're the number 1 podcast platform, well, they are by reach, but they're certainly not by total downloads. And I think it's a story that needs to be told a little bit more. And it's interesting seeing this Acast data actually telling you that. Number one, by the way, is Podcast Addict, which is actually a podcast put together by a Frenchman. And that has 6.4 downloads per user, which is really high in comparison to, Spotify's 2.2.
Acast has also added targeting by Nielsen audience segments on the company's self-service platform. And their targeting is now available in the US, Canada, and Australia. Is this good, James?
It's good if you want to target certain people. This is information based on a listener's IP address, and it's probably household information because that's all that these companies can actually get hold of. But what Nielsen do is they buy a lot of data from other people. They mush it all together with their own data from individual IP addresses, and they can work out whether or not somebody in that household is keen to buy a new car or is, is retirement age or whatever it is. Interestingly, Acast have made targeting available in the US, Canada, and Australia, but Nielsen audience segments are available throughout much of mainland Europe as well. Acast isn't making that available. Can you say GDPR?
I think I can say, ooh dear. Yes.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And I think goes to show how lax the privacy rules are in the US, Canada, and Australia in comparison to mainland Europe.
Well, not related to that at all, but we are excited that next week we've got Kwame Roden, who's the principal engineer at Acast. I've been looking forward to talking to him about what Acast's doing with the podcast standards project.
Oh, yeah.
So next week we'll be talking to him about what's Acast's role there.
Excellent. Stick that in your diary for next Friday. That will be a good thing. Now, I bumped into a man from Podx Group while I was at the Spotify Podcast Summit last week. And wow, they are doing quite something, aren't they, Sam?
Yeah, look, when they first appeared, and I remember talking about it with you, it was like, oh, okay, here's a group. They're taking 50% of companies. They're buying up a few people here and there. It seemed very underwhelming. But over a period of, well, let's say the last couple of years, they've acquired companies in Sweden, in Finland, in the UK, and they've gone further afield to Argentina. So they really are building up something quite interesting. So just like you were talking to Frederick over in Berlin, one of the co-founders, I thought we should get Stefan, the CEO, and also one of the founders, onto the show and ask him what is Podx and what are they up to?
Well, I worked in media for the past 20 years, and I've been leading the operations for Viacom, ProSiebenSat.1, Discovery, and last, before I founded Podx, Bauer Media here in the Nordic market.
Yeah.
So
very big group.
Yeah. And during that time, the last 5 years, I was really driving the digital and the podcast agenda within Bauer internationally, and missioned the importance of radio companies embracing and developing their digital future. So that's sort of my background and my thinking behind Podx.
Now, who are your co-founders in the business then?
It's Patrick Svensk, who's been a TV man, you could say. He's built Zodiac, which is today a part of Banijay, and Nice Entertainment for the Viaplay group. And also Fredrik Said, who comes from Acast and is really the one of us who has the most sort of international podcast background. So Patrick, he has built, if you like, something like Podx in the TV world. And Frederick has been an important part of the international expansion of Acast. And I've been working with audio entertainment for most of my work life.
So given what I said right at the beginning, that your goal is to help emerging podcast producers, creators with finance as well as IP rights, what is your business model then? What is Podx's model?
What we like to do is to build a world-leading international podcast collective, if you like, a collective or a group of the best, including the best podcast creators in the world. We think that by bringing them together, they will become stronger, learn from each other, take each other's formats international, and really, because the background is really that we see that many of the podcast businesses are very small. but very talented. But together they will become stronger. So the business model is really to invest in these companies and to become a majority shareholder. It's not because we want everyone to become the same. Everyone will keep their brands, their podcasts, their culture, their language, their nationality. But if we can consolidate this in one group, we think that the sense of belonging to one group and the will to actually help each other will be much stronger. So we become majority shareholders of the businesses that we invest in, and the founders of those businesses become minority shareholders of Podex. So that's why we believe it's truly a collective. I mean, if in a few years' time, podcast creators from all over the world will together own maybe half of Podex.
In the Web 1.0 world, I used to work for a company called CMGI based out of Boston. I was their marketing director. And we had a very similar model. We had Alta Vista, Two Rome, Navio. I mean, we had about 60 companies eventually within the portfolio. And the synergy that those companies brought each other was what raised the value. I think CMGI was raised to over $1 billion. I guess what you're saying is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's the Podex family together will make a stronger proposition. How do you fund and finance it?
We're financed and funded by a company called Calbo, an investment company. So they are the majority shareholder now of Podex and they provide the financing for the investments that we do. And we're not necessarily looking for an advertising network. We are very neutral when it comes to business models. I mean, we see that there is an advertising business model. There is a subscription business model that out there. There are commissioners ordering and asking for content from podcast creators. There are branded podcasts. So there are multiple business models around podcasting at the moment. And we don't know, and I don't think anyone knows, which of those will grow the fastest and be most successful. I think that many of these models will exist in parallel. And if you compare with television and other medias. So it's very important for us to say that we like podcast companies that do great content and that have found a business model that works for them. And it's not necessarily the same business model as another company that we invest in. So that's how we think around that.
So given that you've got quite a large portfolio now and quite a diverse portfolio, I mean, you've got companies in Argentina now and recently you acquired the one in Finland.
Yeah.
How do you determine which one to go for next? Or, do you just say, right, Italy's a market we want to be in, let's go and find a player, or do you go and find a company first that just happens to be in another country? What's the criteria for acquiring the next company?
Very relevant question and something that we talk about a lot, but we have decided to limit ourselves to Europe primarily and Latin America. And we believe for business purposes very much in big languages that could reach many people. English being the most important one, but also Spanish and French. So we believe very much in the greater markets in Europe and Latin America with a lot of people and big languages. So that's sort of the frame. But within that frame, we are looking for very creative and successful companies when it comes to content creation, companies that won prizes, but also companies that have proven that they can make successful podcasts over and over again and generate revenue around those podcasts. So content is the core. That's the most important part. Management is very important, showing that you can actually do something with your content business-wise. And then we also like evergreen content so that you actually can use your content over and over again. History is a perfect example. True crime, documentaries, where you can actually listen to something today and you can listen to the same thing in 5 or 10 years with the same level of excitement. That's the type of content that we like. And then last but not least, we like companies that have the ambition to protect and keep as much as possible of their content in order to be able to do business with it onwards and in the future. So that's the main criteria, as I would say.
Given one of your founders has got a TV background, do you see taking these podcasts and putting these to TV and film? Is that one of the roads to market?
It could be, but it's not one of the main roads. I mean, we say to all the companies that we meet, that it's audio first, it's podcast first. And if you're successful and you have something fantastic that someone wants to make television or film out of, that's great, but that's a bonus. That's the icing on the cake. We are almost a little bit worried about podcast companies that think too much of the possibility that everything will become television and film, because that's not going to happen. That will be, I think, the exception rather than the rule. So when it comes to format development and how to make business out of your IP, we much more believe in that a great podcast in Finland could be translated to French and English and Spanish and be successful as a podcast in other territories.
Right. So Podimo, based out of Denmark, has a very similar model to you, although they acquire it to go into the Podimo app, and then they look at translating that into multiple other different languages and countries. And they've stayed out very much until recently, the UK market. But what is it with Sweden? You've got Spotify, you've got Acast, you've got Podimo, you've got Podex. I mean, what's going on in the water over there?
It's probably not for me to answer because it's a much bigger question. But you're right that, you know, starting maybe with Spotify and even earlier, there is a business culture
Skype.
here. Yeah, absolutely. There is a business culture here around technology that is, it's just here. And it's, like I said, I'm humble enough to realize that I'm not the person to explain that because it's a much bigger topic, but it's here. And yeah, I guess you have to have certain financial resources to be successful in building businesses and maybe especially global businesses with the technology. And, you know, this part of the world is lucky enough to have a high GDP and good, you know, schools and all the rest of it. So social welfare and what have you. But it's interesting that many companies come from here. But back to your first question there, we do not at all see Podimo as competitors. We rather see them as business partners because they are commissioning content from several of our companies. So they are really clients. I mean, they are coming to our companies and asking for content. We see them more as a platform and a distribution partner for the content that our businesses create.
So did I miss something in the story of Podex? Did you do a funding round? Because obviously Podimo raised 75 million, which has allowed them to go and do what they're doing. You've obviously got backers, but, you know, is the backer a VC or a private equity? I mean, how much more can you invest, you know, going forward?
We don't know exactly how much more we can invest, but the company Carbo that funds us has a great backing. It's not private equity, but the money comes from private equity originally. And now it's a private office. And if they like what we're doing, they could invest a lot more. So we're not going for any external rounds trying to find money elsewhere. We have the financial backing that we need.
So fast forward 6 months from now, I mean, more acquisitions in the pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we will probably do, 2 to 4 more acquisitions within that period. But we're also now going into a very interesting phase, and this is really where the work begins, that we want to deliver the advantages of being a Podex company to the companies that we have invested in the last 6 months. So we're now working hard with the business development, content creation, exchanging ideas, exchanging formats, working with IP and the legal side of things in order to not give everything away to the commissioners. So now it's really when the fun and the real work starts, when we actually have 6 companies in the group.
So what's the exit strategy for Podex, if there is one yet?
Yeah, I like to say and to think that you should not think too much about an exit strategy. You should think about building a fantastic business, because if you have a fantastic business, you can keep it and live from the dividends. You can put it on the stock market, or you could sell it. So the core of any business exit strategy should be to build a fantastic business. And that's what we're trying to do.
I only mention it because Spotify and Acast are both floated on markets right now. And I just wondered if that's a natural evolution for you guys.
It could be, but it could be keeping it, or it could be selling it as a whole, or it could be the stock market, definitely. But we are really at a very early stage. We have just bought the first 6 businesses in the last 6 months, and we want to build a group to become bigger and more profitable and a leader when it comes to content development and IP creation and development of business around IP in the world for podcasters. And we are not there yet, so we have some more work to do.
Stefan, thank you so much. Now, before you go, where can content creators and companies go to find out more about Podx?
We have a webpage, and they could email me or call me, or I'm sure they could find us, but the webpage is a good start, podxgroup.com.
Stefan, thank you so much for your time. Exciting times for Podx, and I look forward to meeting Frederick in London.
And thank you so much for talking to me, Sam. It's been great. Talk to you again.
Stefan Rossell from Podx. Really fascinating company, and looking forward to learn a little bit more about that in the future.
Now, here's an interesting one for you, James. Do you ever listen to Pod Save America from Crooked Media?
I don't, but only because I find American politics deeply dull, so I don't bother listening. But, it'd be quite interesting if there was a UK version.
Well, hold your horses then, because the first episode of Pod Save the UK from Crooked Media is set to arrive on May the 4th. Now, I think with The Rest is Politics and The Newsagent over here in the UK, which are the two leading shows. I mean, not just across politics and news, but they also happen to be very high as well across all categories. It's interesting to see that Pod Save the UK is coming out to do something similar, or at least to try and challenge them.
New episodes of Pod Save the UK from Crooked Media and Reduced Listening are available Thursdays, starting May the 4th, wherever you get your podcasts.
That'll be an interesting download.
Yeah, no, I think it will be Nish Kumar and Coco Khan will be doing that particular show. In fact, I was talking to somebody that's been working on that show at the Radio Days Europe, and they were working out whether or not they should be calling it Pod Save the UK or Pod Save the Queen.
Oh, very good.
Pod Save the Queen, of course, is very good, except
it's a king.
She went and died, so that's probably not. And Pod Save the King, no. nobody's interested in any of that. But still, there we go. Executive producer is Louise Cotton. Reduced Listening is an interesting company. I've not heard too much about them, but they are, Joby Waldman is the managing director of the company, and lots of other folk working there. It's a big old company, lots of ex-BBC people, as you might expect in there. But really interesting set of folk. And I'm quite excited about this new show. So it should be good.
Yeah, Nish Kumar's very good, actually. He's a very good comedian and someone I happen to know, so we'll try and get him on the show.
Somebody you happen to know. Isn't it always the way? If you can't wait, by the way, you should also go and have a listen to The Bugle, which is an excellent satirical podcast, which is from the UK, but also includes people in Australia, in India, and in the US as well. And I would heartily recommend it. Let's go around the world, shall we?
Yeah, James, you've been organising more reviews. This one is a podcast review of podcasts in Indonesia. Tell me more.
Yeah, you're right. This is another article from Guang Jinyo, who has written a bunch of articles for Podnews about podcasting in East and Southeast Asia, and this time Indonesia, who has, loads and loads and loads of people who live there and everything else. It's really interesting, again, looking into Indonesia, looking into what works and what doesn't, and what some of the barriers are. And there's quite a few barriers in Indonesia, and some of those barriers are the law. You can, if you're not careful, you can be thrown into jail for defamation and slander if you're not careful, even on podcasts as well. There are laws around LGBTQ plus issues as well, which make conversations around that a little bit difficult. So, quite a lot of stuff going on there. But edutainment works pretty well in that particular country. audiobooks aren't booming yet in that country, so maybe there's an opportunity there. But the format choice, basically, politics, global history, general science, all of those sorts of things probably work really well. But there's a lot of education going on in that particular area. You can find out more in Podnews. We published it yesterday. Podnews.net will find that.
I'm guessing therefore Tucker Carlson won't be going to Indonesia. Interesting.
I wouldn't have thought so.
No. He's in enough trouble already. Now, you've also been talking about this thing called Nemono sound capsule. What is a Nemono sound capsule, James?
Yes, well, exactly. And indeed, is it even pronounced Nemono? I think it's pronounced Nomino. A bit like the Muppets.
No, you can't say that. Yes, exactly. I had that straight in my head.
James from the Edit again. It turns out it's pronounced this way.
Nomano. Tools for great storytelling.
Anyway, yes, it's wow, it's an incredible thing. So I have one for review. They're not going to let me keep it for fairly obvious reasons because it's $2,500.
Wow,
that's why they're not going to let me keep it. It's a beautifully made thing. And it would be perfect for us, Sam, when we are at conferences, for example, and we want to record, then literally it's this big round sort of teapot-looking thing. You open it up, and it's got 4 little wireless microphones that all record on the microphone, and then it's got a thing in the middle which takes ambisonic noise to help with noise reduction and all of that kind of stuff. It's a beautiful device. Absolutely not great value, I don't think, if you are not going to be using this sort of thing every day or indeed every week. But I think, in my review, which the company is just having a fact check on, so who knows quite how my review is going to come back. But anyway, in my review, I'm basically saying, this would be a perfect tool for a busy production house, be a perfect tool for somebody like Global, for the BBC, for Bauer, for NPR, because it probably replaces a studio booking, probably replaces a on-the-spot sound engineer to sit there and watch your levels and all of that. You don't need any of that. You just basically unpack it, stick the microphones on you, and then hit the red button to start recording. So really nice, really simple tool. But it is, yes, $2,500 plus a monthly subscription for the cloud recording tool. So it's not a cheap device.
I'll stick with my wireless Goes. Thank you very much.
Yes.
For a lot less.
I think that's probably right.
Now, in Ireland, a podcast in Ireland made €190,000 profit last year. The company's called Lightning Seeds Limited. It's owned by the Irish broadcaster Loretta Blewett, who happens just to be the cousin of US President Joe Biden, James.
Yes, apparently. So Loretta Blewett is, I discover how you pronounce her name because, Ireland. And so she is one of the hosts of Tommy, Hector and Loretta, which was a winner last year in the Irish Podcast Awards last year. It's currently on a hiatus at the moment, but comes back later on in the year. Interestingly, they use advertising, they use Acast Plus's subscription tool, and they sell merch as well. And she is one of 3. And there's another person who is part of it as well. Hang on.
I took his name out because I couldn't pronounce it.
Hector O'Hochaghan is another one of the hosts, and he has ended up earning quite a lot of money from it as well in his own company, Low Profile. So, it seems to be doing incredibly well. And it's another Acast story because that seems to be where they're getting most of their cash there. So, I've thought that was a very interesting read. Of course, they are not the same as, many other podcasters who aren't quite earning that amount of money, but great to see that it's possible.
Now, jobs, James. Tell me more.
Jobs. Oh, yes. There's plenty of jobs going on. And plenty of changes too. Meera Sharma has been hired as story editor, Meera Kumar as series producer, and Dinesh Kumar as development producer at Vespucci as part of their new podcast commissioning fund. There's lots of stuff coming out of Vespucci. Elle Fanning is making a show. Love Plus Radio is making a show. All kinds of stuff going on there, and some more hires as well. Tom Dark, who used to be head of TV promotions and podcasting at Warner Records, has jacked it all in and started his own company. It's called Dark Side Media, and it's a music promotion, podcast production, and talent management company. He'll be busy. And Ariel Shapiro is, she's probably packing up and, and moving out as we speak. She's the writer of Hot Pod. And she's also very pregnant. So Amrita Khalid is looking after Hot Pod in the meantime, and I wish them well. And although not that well, obviously. If you're looking for a job, though, Podnews has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world, and they're free to post. It'll just take 2 minutes to add a new role at podnews.net/jobs.
The tech stuff on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk. And I've been playing around with Hindenburg Pro 2, which is getting even better.
Yeah, now tell me more, because we had a back and forth conversation about SRT files, James. And it seems that they've fixed it in Hindenburg Pro 2.
Yes, I really like the way that I can give feedback to Hindenburg Pro 2 and say, yeah, if you just tweaked it like this, then it would work so much better. And so, yes, you can now add speaker names to the Podcasting 2.0 standard in your SRT files when you're producing a transcript, which is really good. If you want to end up using that, you just right-click somewhere on the manuscript and choose Export. Also, another thing that I've managed to get Hindenburg to do and to fix in Hindenburg Pro 2 is chapters. You can now export chapters, including the 000 chapter that you need for Spotify and for YouTube. It will automatically add that for you as you copy those chapters out, which is really helpful. But that will be certainly very useful if you're wanting to dump your chapters into YouTube and into Spotify. Do you remember when I was talking about doing exactly that a couple of weeks ago? Mm-hmm. And basically gaming the system so that chapters are now available in YouTube and in Spotify. Well, I've got 90% of the way there now. I've got a little script that works out where my chapters are and gives me that file. And I've got another little script which theoretically should upload it to the Podnews website so that it appears in the correct RSS file just for those two apps. There's just one technical issue that I have to work through before that actually works properly. But so I've managed to do that. So Buzzsprout will hate me as well as everybody else who said, "No, James, it's a bad idea."
Hey, you had to do something on a long flight back from Berlin, so at least we now know what you did.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, Podverse, friends of the show, have added speaker names to transcripts as well in its web player. So you can now see, if you look at our podcast, for example, you can now see your and my name there as well. So that's very good. Well done,
yes,
Mitch.
Which is good. And Podfans is also displaying speaker names. You know a thing or two about Podfans?
Oh, yeah, them. Oh, yeah. Well, I might tell you about it one day. Who knows?
Yeah. So that's very good, and I think more and more people supporting transcripts is a good thing. There's a new version of Podfriend coming up soon as well that will support the Podfollow feature, assuming that the Podfollow feature doesn't get changed by moaning minis that just want to change it all. But that will be very nice as well. Talk to me about the value time split tag.
Do I have to? I did look at it. Oh my God. We were talking about pod rolls, keep it simple, stupid.
Yes.
Well, yeah, here we go. Podcast value time split tags. So I love Alex Gates, but he's been adding loads of different fields to the value tag so that you can put them in chapters. I think it comes from Adam's desire to have the ability to split it for when you have a music track within a podcast so that you can pay
Yes, I think that's
somebody.
exactly it.
I will just point out your fellow Australians, Mr. Edward de Bono, who had my favourite phrase, complexity is failed simplicity. This is very complex, and I'm not sure that I'll put my Podfans hat back on yet, are going to be able to implement it. It's very, very complex.
Yes. And I should just point out that Podfollow is being supported by more apps out there than the cross-app comments, which I think just goes already. And it's not even been approved yet. So, so that's a thing. It's a bit of a frustration. Bunches of new tags appearing. Nathan Gathright. It's like Bath or Bath.
Yes, depending where you are in England, yes.
Nathan Gathright, let's go with that, has written a blog post talking about update frequency, and he's actually done a new proposal on GitHub, which is a way of telling podcast directories when you update. So are you a weekly show? Are you a daily show? Are you a daily show but only during the week? All of that kind of stuff. I looked at it and I thought, actually, there's some really good work that's gone into that. So you'll find that the Podnews RSS feed already supports that, because that's quite nice. It's still probably going to be a little bit complicated for many people, but it's nice to see.
Well, considering only 14% of all shows on Apple Podcasts use the update frequency, adding extra fields to this, I'm not sure is going to actually make more people use it.
Yes. Well, yes, that may be one of the problems. But I mean, it's certainly it's a nice idea, and let's see if it goes anywhere. There's a proposal on the GitHub right now. There was a nice chat room for the Podcasting 2.0 podcast last week, and weirdly, I was able to listen live to it, which was exciting. So I was actually able to play around with the chat room as it happens. Normally, that's at about 4 o'clock in the morning for me, but I was in Berlin, and so therefore I could actually have a listen, and it was rather good.
Now, moving on, Podscribe has launched a new content analysis tool powered by, here we go, ChatGPT.
Yes. What they're basically saying is that transcripts are all very well, but transcripts don't necessarily understand sarcasm. They don't understand the context that something is in. And so this is using ChatGPT to better understand the context of particular words that are used. It uses the existing GARM framework, which is the standard that the IAB set, and looks pretty good. I would say that because they're sponsoring the Podnews daily newsletter right now, of course, just as a disclosure. But you can join the wait list if you'd like to give it a go. It's at podscribe.com/blog. And you'll find out more details there. But always interesting seeing what that company are doing. Only a couple of weeks ago, they also achieved IAB certification, which, as they point out, they are the only company with IAB certification that isn't actually selling their own media. Always worthwhile bearing that in mind too, certainly from a analysis point of view.
Now, a quick little bit of odds and sods that are floating around. Oscar announced that there's a big Fountain update coming next week. So I pinged Oscar, and he'll be on the show next week to tell us all about it.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to hearing more about what some of those updates are. I might know one of them. So that's all very good.
There is also a new Noster music player out there. Friend of the show, Moritz Kaminsky, one of the founders of Olby, tipped me and said, check this one out. It's called Zapster.live. I had a look at it. It's pretty basic. Yes, it does use Noster comments, but it won't be my new music player. That's for certain.
Yes. If you're a fan of Telegram, using Telegram instead of a website, when you should really be using a website, then Scribbler is probably for you. It's a free podcast summarizer, Scribbler.so. Where's that? Anyway, it's a free podcast summarizer. It works through Telegram, if you like that sort of thing. OSHA has added AI to its platform as well, so you can now get it to produce social media posts and stuff like that through AI. So that's all very good. OSHA, very interesting company. They seem to be on fire right now.
I just thought I'd reach out to Maxime, who is the CEO of OSHA, and get him on the show. So again, we never know. He might be on next week's show as well, but if not, it'll be the week after.
Ah, very good. Yes, that would be a good thing to have a listen to. I mentioned Scribbler.so. Do you know where SO is?
Soweto.
Somalia.
Oh,
Somalia.
Only 1,000 miles out.
Yes. Why would you have a .so? Anyway, best of luck, Scribbler. Let's have a look at some upcoming events then, shall we?
So the Webby 27th Annual Awards were announced. Yes, the winners were announced. Smartless won the Webby Podcast of the Year. So there were some really interesting winners in that section. James, just remind me, because I don't think you've mentioned it before. Do you have a Webby?
No, I don't have a Webby.
Oh,
I've got two. Yes, no, absolutely.
Well done, you.
So the Webbies are one of the longest running awards which are going on. Of course, lots of other awards going on to the ARIAs in the UK, which is the Audio and Radio Industry Awards. They have an awful lot of podcast awards going on there as well. They used to be called the Sony Radio Awards back in the day. When I went, I saw Dame Edna once. God rest her soul. At one of those. So that was a good thing. Talking about awards, obviously there's the AMBIs as well, which are back next year. You had a quick chat about the Podcast Academy, the company that runs the AMBI Awards, didn't you?
Yeah, Amy Tucker, who runs Tuck It Out, is also a board member. We met over in Vegas, lovely lady, and I thought, why not ask her what's going on with the Podcast Academy? Because I had a few questions.
So I'm going to give you the best definition that I think explains it all. It is the only professional membership organization that unites podcast creators with industry leaders. Think of it as podcast movement all year round, where everyone from the industry comes together, is able to network. Independent creators like me can meet big network heads. Besides the networking, the educational portion of it, the programming part of it. And so I like to think, if you want to do like a little similarity, it's podcast movement online all year. Of course, we're starting to have more live events through the Academy. Tons of stuff happening this year. It's all about inclusivity. And we are really cognizant of having diverse leadership, not just with independents and industry leaders, but with female, male, all backgrounds. And I think the two pillars are to encourage creativity and award excellence. So like uplifting the industry.
Okay. Now, one of my observations at the Vegas event where we had the AMBIs was it was very American.
Yeah.
Now, so I jokingly called it the American Podcast Awards, really, because there was no European or British or Australian representation.
Right.
And that felt, for something that's meant to be an industry overarching academy, it felt very myopic. It was like the World Series of baseball, right? The Americans have it.
Yeah.
No, the rest of the world.
It is the
plays.
World Series. I'm kidding. Yes.
Yeah. So that's what we were joking about. That would be one thing I'd love for the Academy this year, to try and reach out to more international participants to come on board. If you were selling the Academy, why would I join, from based over here in Europe?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And you're right. I think we are still somewhat new. This is only the second year doing the AMBIs. So I think it is US-centric a little bit more, just because it's an easier way to start as a new organization, to figure out the kinks, how to grow this bigger. And of course, we want it to be international. And of course, we want to include everyone globally. Now, that being said, we do have 2 members of the board that are based outside the US, one in London. I believe her name is Christina Moore. Check me on that. And then Chirag Desai is based in Dubai. And we are actually partnering with Sonoro to go to Mexico City in June to talk about more of the global landscape and meet more global creators and industry leaders. So it's getting there. I just think, honestly, the simple answer is it was the easiest way to start, I think, because we are so new. And now that we are understanding what we're capable of and the interest globally now, it is definitely 100% like what we want to focus on as well.
Okay. Now, Rob Greenlee does a weekly podcast with Todd Cochran, and they were talking about an outreach program, really, of education. And I was like, really? So, again, tell me more about some of the other activities apart from the Ambies, which is very glamorous, and it's a once-a-year event.
Right.
Throughout the rest of the year, what does the Academy focus on?
So we have this great mentorship program where we ask mentors to sign up. And if you want a mentor, we pair you up with someone who is a professional, who has been doing this for a while, someone that we think would be a good match for you. I've done it. I've done it as a mentor and a mentee. I was matched up with Louis, who is one of the heads of Wondery. And I got to talk to Marshall Louis once a month for like 6 months, just me and him, as a little independent podcaster. So
well, you can talk to Jen Sargent now.
Yeah, she's on the board, by the way, now.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, I mean, the access to the people who, are frankly hard to get hold of because they are busy. They are running things. And so the mentor program, I think, is fantastic and very unique. And we have so many amazing names on there ready to help and give back. We also have masterclasses, which will be now called TPA Presents, where we have masters in various areas of the industry speaking to our members about different aspects, whether it's marketing, audience growth, whatever it is. We have it all. Every category is covered. And also, again, it's easy to reach out to these people and ask the questions and connect. So a lot of this is just being able to connect and talk to people that are maybe not easy to get hold of and get the advice. And I do think the peer-to-peer connection is super important as well. We already talked about how lonely podcasting can be. I joined the TPA just to meet other podcast people. I didn't expect anything out of it, but just to talk to other people that are, I'm like, what the hell are we doing? What's happening here? So for me, I initially started it off just to make friends and feel like I had an office of some sort. I didn't expect to talk to Marshall Louis and get all this great advice. It was an amazing thing that happened. And I was like, wow, TPA is really legit. We are also going to be coming out in August, going to have our own podcast where podcast industry people will be interviewing other podcast industry people. And you can sign up to be on it. It helps with your own marketing and you get to meet others. And so we want podcasters to have that access. So we're starting on new programs as well. Obviously, the Ambies are there. They're great, but we're thinking about other exciting things. The other thing to remember is that we are partnering with a lot of other platforms like the Black Pod Collective, BIPOC Podcast Creator, Air, State of Women. So we're working with everyone because we want to be team players.
Yeah. What was interesting as an observation for me at the Ambies was these amazing creators and producers were winning awards. And yet, in my podcast world, not one of those people exists.
Okay.
Because it's a very interesting separation between the two parties. I deal in a world where we're looking at people like Adam Curry in the podcasting 2.0 world and technologies and what's moving the RSS needle forward, so micropayments and new ways of monetizing your podcast. Right. And then on this other side, you've got these amazing production companies building and spending. And I wonder whether the Ambies would have space for extending the awards. This is just maybe some feedback to some of the platform players. There's a great platform called Fountain, which is innovative, right? There's some great hosts out there who are doing amazing work, and there's no recognition for them by the Podcast Academy.
Right.
And it felt like it was like, if you've produced this amazing podcast that has a big high-end budget, and yes, I know independents were covered as well, then we will celebrate you.
Right.
But the people that they rely on are the nuts and bolts people who build the railways and give you the pickaxes and whatever, so you can go and dig the gold. But these guys are building those railways and selling you the pickaxes,
right?
But they're not getting any notice at all.
No, for sure. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think that's true. So I think a few things with that. I think that's why on the board of governors, that's why there's so many of us that are coming from different angles, aspects, places, roles to talk about these kind of things, because it can't just be all industry leaders on the board. So that's why they brought in someone like me who's an independent, who has literally just learned about the podcast industry in the past 20 months. And I also do think, again, the Ambies, we just finished our second year. It is new. And so I think we're always looking to see how to get better, how to be more inclusive, what we need to do to change. So I do think the feedback is definitely something we need to hear, and what we're talking about, like what we can do better next year. Who can we include? How do these independents feel? How do these platforms feel? What are we missing? I think it's ever evolving still as a new organization. And so, yeah, I agree. We need to make it happen. So I think that's why I love our board, is because it is so diverse. And I will tell you, Sam, when I was voted on last year, I was nervous. I was like, no one's going to listen to me. Like, who am I? I felt empowered. It feels like everyone's on the same level playing field. And it's really nice.
Yeah, again, and I know there's a lot of work being done around education as well. City University here in the UK have started an MA in podcasting, which I think is great. Is there, again, any thread or theme within the Podcast Academy to do more grassroots education work?
Yeah, I think so. I think for now we are definitely kind of filtering and understanding what we have done so far to make sure that is working before we start expanding more, right? And so in terms of grassroots, is definitely on the agenda. I don't know that there's been nothing specific talked about yet. So I think, sure, why not? Right? We're not this old organization that's stuck in our ways. I think we're an organization that's still ever evolving. That's why it's really cool to be part of it right now, because we can actually make a change in there. We can actually form ideas that maybe we missed or maybe that are needed. Like podcasting, still, the wild, wild west, still is ever evolving. And so I think we are too. We're always willing to grow. I don't think there's ever like oh God, no. It's always like, oh, okay, let's see how we can make this work.
Cool. Yeah. So if I wanted to join, where would I go? thepodcastacademy.com. I believe that's nice and simple. Just checking.
I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah. So membership, you can sign up there. Look, Sam, there is always like discounts on membership. So make sure you look out for that. I think it's $100 a year, but we always have some sort of deal or discount.
Cool. Yeah. And if anyone wants to go and listen to your podcast, where would they go?
Anywhere they listen to podcast. The website is tuckeredoutwithummy.com. I'm obviously on all the major platforms. I do have a newsletter. It's on Substack, ummytucker.substack.com. And then my Instagram is @tuckeredoutpodcast.
And you and I are going to be doing a South Asian podcast event in London.
I'm so ready. Like
sometime soon.
So ready. I'm doing one in DC in June for the Impact Group. So we're focusing on South Asians and politics in the US. And I have some big names on that one. And so we can totally make it happen in London.
Amy Tucker from the Podcast Academy. There is a longer version of that interview on Podnews Extra, which you can get wherever you got this podcast, probably. So go and hunt out that podcast if you want to hear more about her podcast and more from Sam and Amy's chat.
Now, one other event coming up. On Tuesday, the 9th of May here in the UK, City University are using an event called Pod Pitching with Brett Spencer and the team. I'll be going along. It'll be an interesting evening. So if you fancy coming along and hearing some of the students and seeing what pitches they're doing for their new podcast projects, do turn up.
Yeah, and it's pretty clever because they get to pitch their podcast projects to all kinds of people, including the BBC's Calic Meir, Darby Doris from Listen, Matt Hill from Rethink Audio, and a bunch of other folk as well. So that's a pretty clever thing, isn't it? If you're busy working on podcasts, to be able to actually try and sell them to some of the biggest commissioners in the UK industry, that's a pretty impressive thing. So it'll be interesting to find out how all of that goes. The IAB has announced the agenda for the IAB podcast up front. It's on May the 11th. I noticed that Conan O'Brien is going to be one of the people who is speaking there. Yes, that's going on in New York. But if you can't be bothered to go to New York, you can enjoy that virtually as well. They have asked me whether or not I would like to enjoy it virtually. And my answer has been no, because that's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not doing that. The New Zealand Podcast Summit is happening in Auckland on the 13th of May. I will be over there finishing off the day with slides. Brilliant. Can't wait for any of that. And of course, there's the Podcast Show 2023 in London, which now, interestingly, I've been given a slide saying that I am speaking. So apparently I am speaking, even if I'm not on the schedule yet. So there you go. You can use the code Podnews to grab your passes at a discount if you want. The podcastshowlondon.com is where to get those. So that will be good. And that is towards the end of May. And Sam and I will also be there.
Are we going to be on stage, or are they going to bump us off again as last year?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know. We're not actually there right now, are we? So yes, we will.
No.
We will.
I think we've been bumped off again.
One more thing that I will be at. Actually, a couple more Radio Days North America, which is in Toronto in early June, and Podcast Movement in Denver, which is late August as well. By the way, if you received an email from some random company talking to you about rubbish airport hotels, mark it as spam. It's got nothing to do with Podcast Movement. I checked. So there we go. And then, of course, there are our events as well. Podnews Live, which is happening in Salford on the 13th of June. Gosh, that's quite close now, isn't it? We should do some planning for that. Podnews Live in September, on September the 27th. Tickets for both of those on sale right now if you'd like to join us. Podnews.net/live. And there are more events, both paid for and free, at Podnews, virtual events or events in a place with people. And if you're organising something, tell the world about it. It's free to be listed. Podnews.net/events.
Boostergram
Corner
on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Oh, it's our favourite time of the week, Sam. It's Boostergram Corner. We didn't have any last week,
No.
So I'm delighted that we've had so many this week.
Indeed. Dave Jones, the pod sage himself, said Phase 6 of the namespace will close on June the 1st. So let's see what we can polish up and get as consensus. He gave us, is that a rush boost? 12,112 sats?
I think it's a big rush boost, yes.
Big rush boost,
yes, and thank you, Dave. It was very interesting listening to both Dave and Adam getting very, very, very grumpy on the Podcasting 2.0 podcast last week. Adam particularly, gosh, about some of the interminable conversations going on the GitHub of, somebody's just thought up a really simple idea. Let's make it 4 times more complicated. Yes, I think that's a good thing, worthwhile taking a look at that. Kyrin from the Mere Mortals podcast, thank you for your row of ducks, 2222 sats. Keen to hear Stephen B's interview, he said. That was last week.
Yes,
so you'll have heard it. He's been amazing in helping support new tags from the very beginning. And then he sent a double row of ducks, 4444. Epic chat with Stephen. I was hanging off every word. So excited at the moment for where we'll be in a few months' time and where this will all be in the future. Go podcasting. Calm down, Karin. But thank you for the sats. That's great.
Dave Jones as well. He had a huge smile on my face listening to this. So thanks, Dave. Yes, it was a very good interview with Stephen. Stephen's very interesting to talk to.
Yes, and he also sent another boost, 5150 sats. which I was just looking up if you heard the clatter of the keyboard. Great interview with Stephen Bell. He is such a solid guy. Numerology. Let me just have a quick look. Here we go. An initial list. Right, here we are. 5150. Is it on the numerology? Yes, it's a Van Halen boost. There you go. Because of course it is.
Yes.
Why is it a Van Halen boost, 5150?
I've got to start getting in there and putting some soul boosts in there. That's what my job's going to be this week. I'm going to get some numbers and soul boosts.
Yes, and of course, 5150 is the 7th studio album by American rock band Van Halen. It was released in 1986. What's the biggest song on that album? It's Why Can't This Be Love? So tell me why can't this be love? I knew that. and the Tone Wrecker sent us a row of ducks as well. Fantastic to have Stephen B on to get some additional recognition for the amount of effort and creativity he's bringing to a new wave of creators discovering the tools he is making available. In a world overrun with takers, need to celebrate these talented makers. Well done. That's a great thing.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for that. If you get value from what we do, or you just want to get your point over in this very podcast, then the Podnews Weekly Review is separate from Podnews. Sam and I share everything from it. We really appreciate your support so we can continue making the show and buying each other beers. You can become a power supporter at weekly.podnews.net. Thanks to Buzzsprout. You can subscribe in Apple Podcasts at apple.co/Podnews. Thank you, Tim Apple. Or support us with Sats. Thank you, Dave and Adam, by hitting the boost button in your podcast app, and of course, Stephen B. And if you don't have one, podnews.net/new podcast apps will help you find a new app as well. So what's been happening for you this week, Sam?
Well, I went up to the Birmingham Podcast Festival, met up with Nina Robinson and a few other speakers. I took my daughter, poor thing. But no, she did want to come with me. So,
why?
Well, she's thinking of going to Birmingham University.
Has she never been to Birmingham?
Well, no, she won't be going again. But she did want to go and have a look around Birmingham University. So we spent the morning at the Birmingham Podcast Festival and then went around the university in the afternoon. So it's very useful. Yes.
Very nice. What else?
I'm also talking to Jess Kaufman, Ariel Nissenblatt and Lauren Purcell about maybe doing a small sort of side project, She Podcast London. I'll let you know. I'm talking to them on Friday, so we'll talk about it on next week's show if anything comes of it.
Yes, well, that sounds nice. Maybe we could do that at some point around Podnews Live, maybe, or would it be for later?
I'm not sure. Let's have a think about it and talk offline.
Yes.
But I'm also talking to the wonderful Tom Rossi about Podcast TXT, which I hate. And we're talking about...
You've never mentioned it?
No, in therapy only. And the idea that Tom's got of adding webhooks to automate the way that we authenticate podcasters. So Tom and I are having a quick chat on Friday, and you never know. We'll see what we come up with.
Excellent. Well, that's all a very smart thing. And you're meeting somebody from a big company that probably doesn't want to be mentioned.
Yes, I know. We'll leave that last one, but it's very nice to go to Battersea Power Station. That's
yes, Battersea Power Station is very, very fancy. So, yes.
Yes. £9 billion are spent on doing that.
Yeah, that looks fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing if I can get an excuse to go and take a peek at that when I'm next in London.
Now, James, what's been happening for you? You had your last day in Berlin. You wrote your lovely Berlin Airport report as well.
I did write my lovely Berlin Airport report as well. If you would like to read my interminable trip reports, then you're more than welcome. My personal website, james.cridland.net, and you'll find some blogs in there. This time in the style of lots of tips. Yes. But gosh, I took all of the planes, I'll tell you. Berlin Airport, I was really excited about Berlin Airport because it's the newest big airport, pretty well anywhere in the world. And I thought, well, this will be amazing to go and see. And it was really dingy and dark and badly signed. It's got those slippy marble floors that make you work twice as hard to get anywhere.
Can't be worse than Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah, just really, yeah. So that was a big sad thing. So yes, but anyway, if you want to read any more of that, james.cridland.net is where you'll find my own personal blog. You're welcome to it. Also, Sam, I also got, and I'm going to show you this on the screen. I also got one of these. Do you know what one of those is?
It's a dolphin. Whistle.
A dolphin whistle. You're very nearly right. Yes, this is a thing called a Flipper Zero. It's all the rage, and I ordered this when I could. And it's basically a hacking tool, and it lets you hack into all kinds of things. It lets you hack into, radio remote controls, infrared remote controls, and stuff like that. I'm looking forward to taking it and turning televisions off in pubs with it. That's going to be one of my plans. So
don't go and sit in the back of a PowerPoint presentation and turn that off.
Well,
if you get bored,
it'll do all of that. Yes, it's a very very.
Can I borrow it then? Can I borrow it when we're in London? Because if I'm bored of a presentation, I can go next, click.
Just press the button and away you go. Yeah, it's the most amazing thing. So yes, I'm very pleased with that. But yes, deeply illicit, and I'm slightly worried about going through airport security with this, in case anybody knows what it really is. But still, if anybody has any tips and tricks on what to do with a Flipper, then Flipper Zero, then by all means get in touch. That would be lovely. And that's it for this week.
You can give us feedback using email to weekly@podnews.net or send us a boostergram. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. And we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout Podcast Hosting Made Easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.
Don't eat me, Todd Cochran.